Well, thank you very much. And Secretary General Buckley, you've raised a number of points. I'm going to try to weave together my own particular way, see what you think. Well, first of all, I have to say it's quite an honor to be invited here as an American. And as somebody who's been working in Berlin for something like 13 years now. I'm with a think tank in Washington, the Wilson Center. But I've been working there, so I feel like I got to know something about energy from the Germans. And about the European Union. So I'll be talking about that. And after all, Germany says they're leading the global energy agenda, and they have big ambitions in this. But I don't know how to put this exactly, because I'm obviously Irish by descent, but it's been 173 years since my great-great-grandfather left here with his mother, and they brought over 8 of the 9 brothers and sisters over the next several years. That was 1848, and so it's well, I don't know what to say, but it makes quite an impression. I'm very honored to be invited, and I won't get to Tipperary, where they were from, or Donegal before that, of course. But anyway, my thanks, my gratitude to the Polish Embassy and to Jacek. So, what I'm supposed to talk about is the role of renewables in securing Europe's energy, which I will, but I kind of rearranged this a little bit. The role of the Green Deal in securing Europe's energy, which, energy and competitiveness, let's put it that way. That these two topics are really married here, okay? Especially in Europe. So what I want to talk about is the Green Deal, the model, and that it's the problem with the model, and not renewables per se, and there's a model-driven crisis. And here's the outline of the points. If I get through all this, is the points I want to go through. But I'll tell you my thesis right up front here. The problem is not renewables per se, but it's the Green Deal model. And I'll go into this before. And what I'd say, it has various technical failures. It's a 45-year-old model since it was first proposed by probably by Amory Lovins, a physicist in the U.S. I'm also a physicist from the U.S., but Amory proposed this. And from the beginning, they said you needed certain things, and these technologies have not been developed if you want an all-renewable system. And I think we should pay attention to that. What does that mean, right? And over-complexity, and there might be a bit of hubris involved in the project. And so some of the particular things are domestic self-sufficiency in renewables, if you're going to have a 100% renewable system. Not every European country will, but Germany, Austria, several others. But it's the essential essence of the Green Deal model. There's also a question of what I would call universal long-term grid-scale storage, the technology. There's a number of other things, the energy mix that you get, the system integration problems, financing, prices, reliability. Thus, the Green Deal actually fails on the question of energy security and competitiveness. And I mean, I can't go through all this. I've taught classes on these things, but these are the 2 issues I want to focus on today that I think are particularly relevant. Domestic self-sufficiency and the lack of long-term storage, and what that means for such a model. And what it actually means, and I think the Secretary General reflected this, both of these things, the problems with these actually make natural gas more geostrategic. And, we know what's happened with natural gas in Europe and where Europe thought they were going to have their backup, right? So if people now talk about European crises, in English we have this plural word, and other people might put it in other order, but I mean, the first one we have up here is energy, whether the energy war or the Green Deal transition, competitiveness, which now people, even in Germany, it's morphed into deindustrialization discussion, defense capacity, internal market, and so forth. And if we think for a minute, being here in Europe, we know that there's certain people's names right now associated with each of these. They're more or less who's the lead on these. And I think you can see Ms. Ribera. She's the first executive vice president of the commission. She was as you probably know, the Spanish energy minister, famous for negotiating the complicated end of nuclear in Spain, which is now about to be carried out. But this number 1 and 2, to go along with my idea that these are intrinsically linked, she's the first executive vice president, and President von der Leyen assigned both these topics to her because they are so related, all right? So here's the outline. So first off, just a little something on the energy war. And my message here is going to be, spoiler, it's not over. Okay. Well, in many ways, it's not over. But in the aspect of being a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, Europe won the energy battle. You have to say, it won. It was really quite something. The Russians certainly didn't expect this, right? When you're 50% dependent on your imports, and you know all sorts of industry is going to shut down, of course they won't have solidarity with the Ukrainians when I invade. And I know the Russians were planning in detail this war over a year before. We could see what they were going to do. And so long story short, the EU did stick together, did have solidarity, did not abandon the Ukrainians for the sake of Russian gas. And yes, it did mean a crisis. I mean, a real crisis. In Germany, even right now, the last data I saw was January, a third of German manufacturing capacity, industrial capacity, is offline. Now, it's not only because of this, but a great part of it is, right? And so we got through it. Part of it was the Americans had a plan. This is interesting. I found more detail because I'm in the business, sort of. The plan was over a year old for how to deal with it, okay? Not that certain people in Europe believed it would happen, but they were quite aware. And this idea that you'd have to do a lot of diplomatic work to bring LNG. So they brought the American LNG, and by luck, I mean really luck, the Chinese weren't over COVID. They didn't need all their LNG, and they're happy to resell it to Europe, right? And we got that for a reasonable price. By luck, it was a mild winter. And not so much by luck. It depends on if the optimistic, official optimism is that, and there was all this voluntary demand destruction. But if you talk to the German business, for example, they say, what voluntary? I can't make money making fertilizer anymore. I had to shut down my production line. I'm moving it to Louisiana. So there was real demand destruction. But that's how we got through it without rationing, right? Without riots or whatever. But here we are. I would say it's a Pyrrhic victory. It's still not normal. Before this winter began, storage was overfull in Europe for natural gas, but the price was 2 to 3 times higher than it was before COVID and before the energy war. So the price hadn't come down, and it wasn't competitive. Not that it was competitive in the first place, European prices for this stuff, right? But there we were, and what happened, Europe really thought, and the people in the business thought, we've got a surplus of gas. It should be a mild winter. If we can get through only using 15, 20 something percent of this, we'll buy it fairly cheap in the summer and we'll enter the next winter and maybe we can really get prices down. Some of the industry will start reopening. Well, that's not what happened. And it's very interesting what happened. It's a structural problem. What happened, it started out great, but in November, we had Dunkelflaute, which is a German word. It was dark. And there was no wind, and it was cold in November. And I was giving a talk in Warsaw as this was going on. They said, what does this mean in German? I said, look outside. And it was the same. In November, the great surplus that was going to save Europe for the next year was gone. Okay? I would say this, by definition, it's an overdependence on wind. You don't depend on something unless you have a backup. And we completely used up the reserve of our backup in November. And then came December, and there was a few more. I'm not giving you the data, I'd be here forever. But there were several incidences. And just this morning, some colleagues in Italy and Algeria had a on-air podcast sort of thing. And it looks like now European storage is down about 34% on average, which is really low. Italy is around 40-something, but Germany and France, they were under 30 at the beginning of this month. So we don't know how low it's going to go. This is going to be so I gave a talk for NATO a little while ago, a month or so, and I said, this is a crisis. The price had already spiked because in summertime, for security, we have to fill that storage to 90% by November. That means they have to buy it in the summer. And if it's down that low, you're going to there's no long-term contracts for this. You have to steal it from Asia, pay more than they're paying. So the price would be so high, there's no way you get that price to resell it in the winter. So the Germans said, let's subsidize it all. And it was a mess, right? This is a real systemic crisis. Now, I think this is kind of strange. Suddenly the price is down, even though everybody knows we're coming up against this wall. What's going on? It's down on a lessening of geopolitical risk because there's talk of somehow the Americans and the Russians getting together and getting Nord Stream running again. I think that low price might not stay for a while, okay? And coming into next year, so this is why I say a Pyrrhic victory. This is undermining European business, right? And there's other problems too, but obviously this is very significant. So now there's another aspect of this, and I'm talking about the Green Deal, which is really very similar to the Energiewende model in Germany, and really very similar. You can look up this fellow, Amory Lovins, I won't go through it in this talk, who proposed this stuff in the 1970s. It's called soft power paths, soft energy path versus hard energy path, that everything could be based on nature. The problem is, and from 45 years ago, in the plan, in the book, they said, the problem is wind and solar are variable. Therefore, they're going to have smart grids, little smart community grids, democratically run. That's all been thrown out. Now, because of the variability, you need massive grids. Hopefully, your neighbor has wind when you don't. I could show you a lot of papers about this. It sort of doesn't work in Europe, okay? Reduced energy use. We're going to cut all this energy use. Well, Europe had already, had significant cuts in the 1970s with the third industrial revolution. But now, suddenly everybody wants to electrify everything for EVs, for heat, for industry, and then comes AI. Each AI center is about 1 gigawatt, and some of the new ones, they want 2 gigawatts of capacity. So that's out the window, okay? And the third thing is storage. And the problem has not been solved. Now, that's why we had the problem when there was the Dunkelflaute. We have to rely on natural gas because there are no batteries backing it up for that length of time, right? So I would say the model has chronic tech problems. So I know there's arguments in Brussels, there's arguments in Washington and so forth. You don't care about the environment, you're a conservative, no, you're a liberal, you're going to throw the money away. You know what? The tech isn't there. At a certain level, it's not political if you look at it this way. Oops, it has its own mind. So that's the question I want to look into a little bit quickly here. The Green Deal has two particular failings in this direction. One is short-term, we have batteries, and yes, the batteries have gone down 97% in price in 2 or 3 decades, but they only can cover a very small percentage of the grid's capacity. They're time limited. People in the business say, yeah, 40 to 60 minutes, but yeah, you could say 4 hours, maybe 8 hours at the most. So look, if you have a solar farm and you get all the extra energy in the middle of the day, your solar is going off when people are coming home and using energy. So for you to put some batteries there, you can shave that top off, save it, and sell it to them here in the afternoon. And your effective capacity factor for that farm is increased. It's a wonderful business model, but it doesn't solve the systemic problem of the grid, right? This is a particular thing, right? That's different that I described earlier. So this is a chart of sodium. I took off the other ones down there because they're not proven technologies. And one thing is all the citing of unproven technology and what they're supposed to do. So at least these are sort of in play. That's why I left them up there. But there's nothing for days, weeks, and seasons from batteries, all right? In terms of capacity, this is from the ministry in Germany. Battery storage facilities are still lagging considerably in Germany. Now, I'll go into, but I'll just give you an idea. Oh, look, it's going up great. All that light blue, that's batteries that people have on their houses with their solar farms, okay? This is not grid scale stuff. So it's actually quite low. So what is long-term storage on the grid? 93% worldwide, and in my country, is pumped hydro. And if you know what pumped hydro is, you have to have 2 reservoirs that are pretty well isolated, one on top of a mountain, higher the better, and one below. When there's extra wind or there's extra solar, you pump water up the mountain at night or sometime at a Dunkelflaute, whatever. You run it back down through a turbine. You get about 85% of the energy back out. The only problem is you need a mountain. And I talked to the Norwegians and I said, well, you got a mountain, you got water in the fjord. And they were aghast. What are you talking about, Thomas? We're not going to pump that dirty water up into our clean water up above. That's salt. I said, oh, okay. They need 2, kind of isolated, and it takes 10 years to build it. So it doesn't have legs. It's not universal. If you've got it, you've got it made. I think there's some in Ireland too. You've got it made. But from Paris essentially to Warsaw, it's what they call, the military guys in NATO call the Great Northern Plain. It's flat, okay? So it ain't going to work. So universal. What is it? Okay. So I would say this is real. I mean, when you talk to people who are doing this stuff, or let's say if I talk to Mr. Habeck, who's the German, up till for a few more days, the German, he's the head of one of the heads of the Green Party, and he was minister, super minister, minister of energy, minister of and environment, and of economy. And I'll tell you what he said a little bit later. But in fact, the de facto solution to this is massively increased natural gas turbine or combined cycle generation. All right. Number two is to have massive interconnections with other countries, because maybe they have more and you have less here. And in Germany, if you're a conservative, say you're going to be the next, perhaps the next chancellor, you'll say that this makes sense. We'll have a liberal market. It'll come from all over. When we don't have it, they'll have it, as if it's, you know, growing wheat or something. But maybe they don't have it in the other countries, okay? And it's extremely expensive. So these are the solutions they will tell you about. Here's our other problem. On the left there is B, domestic renewable capacity is insufficient. What am I talking about? The whole idea was the wind and the sun is everywhere. You can be independent of OPEC and so forth. However, if you read carefully the cover letter, not in the report itself, in Germany, the Bundestag mandated that there has to be an independent committee. There's like 4 or 5 professors who study what they've done in their Energiewende for the last 2 years, and they issue an independent report card with like traffic lights, red, green, blue, you know, how they're doing. And in the cover letter in 2021, before that election, it said, Germany cannot produce enough domestic renewables on its own territory, it never will. What do we do? Well, it changes everything. So what they said is the location is not optimal, obviously. Well, they finally realized that it's not optimal for solar. So, okay. And they also see that they're going to need more electricity, as I said, and so forth. And their model dictated closing the nuclear plants, so they did. So now their coal dependency is up. It's second only to Poland. Okay, so what do? The solution is you have to, and what they suggested, the monitor said, is we need to import green renewable energy from countries where the production of renewable energy is optimal. If it's a nearby place, we'll bring it as electricity. If it's far away, we'll bring green hydrogen. And that's mainly the Middle East, Africa, North Africa, and so forth. And there's billions going into this, okay? So that's the plan, to import electricity, build massive grid connections. So the reality is in Germany, they need 4 big corridors from the north where the offshore wind is, as the Secretary General is referring to in your country. And this is getting it onshore is expensive enough, but then they have to build 4 big corridors, HVDC, high voltage direct current, all the way down south to where the nuclear plants were closed, where the industry is in Bavaria and so forth. It's been 15 years I've been teaching about it. None of them are finished. And the whole thing is about we have to get private equity to involved, and it's not high profit. It's just really going slow. And so as I find when I talk to people in Poland, they want us to do this, but Germany's a rich country. They have all the engineers. They're really into this, and they haven't done it. How are we going to do it with a post-Soviet grid, right? So I think that's a good question. And so there's other issues. The imports aren't necessarily green. Let me just cite this thing, the Nordic problem for the Nordic countries, because they have a lot of hydro and they got gas, and there's demands from Denmark, from Great Britain, and from Germany that electricity has to be brought down and we need to build lines. The problem is their electricity was some of the cheapest in the world before. Suddenly, and the companies love it, right? Because when you have Dunkelflaute down south, the price spikes. But what happens for the consumers at home? Suddenly, they're getting German prices. They're getting Danish prices. And the minister, I have to avoid, maybe it's my Irish background, I have to avoid telling stories. So I'll cut to the chase. The Norwegians, after they talked to the chancellor in Germany and to Mr. Habeck, they introduced a bill in Parliament saying we don't have to send it when you ask for it, and it's against all the EU rules apparently. But they didn't care. I don't think it passed, but they had to do something to placate the public. So it's a serious problem, right? Get your house in order and quit borrowing sugar all the time from the neighbors. So the other problem is green hydrogen at best will take 10 years. Well, anyway, as it's said in Germany, when you ask it, well, it's the law. We're going to do it. So that's how it works. And basically, most experts I talk to is green hydrogen will never go in the grid. And I'm happy to give a talk with the technical details, the level of the production, the storage, transport. In fact, they don't believe anymore, I would say, in Berlin that it will ever be brought by pipelines, although there's a project for 5 big EU pipelines still being pushed. Their idea now is, well, yes, we have to liquefy it. You're right, we have to liquefy it at 20 degrees above absolute zero. That's a little impractical. It's not like LNG, and we have to build special tankers. So we're going to make it into green ammonia. We're going to put 3 hydrogen molecules on a nitrogen molecule, make ammonia. We know how to transport that. Let me just say, that's another like refinery process. And then you get it to Rostock or someplace or Hamburg. What do you do with ammonia, right? You can burn it and get a lot of nitrous oxide, or you can remove it, and that's another 25% of the original energy input. So it's just completely impractical. It might go into niche applications, and some companies will make money, but it's not going to go into the grid to run Europe as the backup. So where are we at? We have all this new natural gas capacity coming online. The German minister, 2 years ago, he said, we need, head of the Green Party said, we need 36 to 39 gigawatts of new natural gas generation. If you don't know what those numbers mean, that's like the size of 36 new coal plants or nuclear plants, okay? And later, officially, it was 25, and he asked Parliament for 12.5. Now, you can imagine people who are sincere about decarbonizing. How is it that you said you're going to double the number of windmills in Germany, but you say in order to do that, you have to install, like essentially a whole parallel system of natural gas. So it doesn't make sense. What happened to our grid scale storage? Don't worry, in 10 years it'll be all fed with hydrogen, okay? And I don't think anybody really believes it anymore. I've been in Algeria where they signed an MOU. I've talked to the Norwegians who tore up their MOU. They said, show me a customer. I don't know if I have to prove, there's talks where I kind of prove this. I used to talk about deindustrialization, and people thought I was being alarmist, but now everybody talks about it in Germany and all the think tanks. It's not just not competitive, okay? It's serious problems. And it's not just energy, of course. We know there's things that make European businesses uncompetitive, but energy is necessary. Not sufficient maybe, but it's necessary. And we're losing the energy war, as I tried to show you. It's a Pyrrhic victory. The Green Deal, this overdependence, I would say, on renewables, some countries 100%, even closing down amortized nuclear plants that were making $1 million a day each profit, carbon-free electricity had to be shut down, and they opened coal plants. With this model, it's not going to work, in my opinion. So both are EU-owned goals, and we have to reform. I think it's simple. We have to reform the Green Deal. So if you look at I won't go through the details, but what Ms. Rivera is saying, who was assigned this problem, is essentially double down on renewables. We are not only going to push forward and really get these, it's going to be expensive as heck. I mean, they admit that. Even the new Conservative Party coming in power in Germany will say, I wouldn't have done it this way. It's very expensive. It was financed all bad. We'll finance it better. But what are we going to do? We've already invested all this money. Let's just push through it and get it over with in 10 years. So I tried to make, actually a former energy minister from that party, and others from that party, and I said, I understand your instincts as conservatives that you want to finance it differently. But it's like the Saxon king. They're Prussian, so I said Saxon, right? It's like the Saxon king. He was, torturing the guys who are going to make alchemy, make lead into gold, and throwing money at him other days. And his son said, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to let them be free. I'm going to get private capital to invest. But the problem is, it was alchemy. It didn't matter how you invest in it, right? You don't have the technology. Okay, and maybe it'll be invented tomorrow. People are very optimistic, but it's been 45 years, and large-scale, grid-scale storage does not exist. So if you're going to go for a model and go over a certain limit, start introducing, I found a talk I gave in 2001, I'm sorry. it's fine to put in renewables, but stay maybe below 25%, because then you got to revolutionize the grid. Then you need massive storage. And the Greens were saying, well, this is great opportunity to leapfrog the Americans. We'll do this research and we'll have a fourth industrial revolution. And it didn't work, okay? So here we are. So what are we going to do? I think we need a radical reform of the Green Deal. Nothing wrong with renewables, but it should be kept to a pragmatic balance. It depends on the country, how good your grids are, how much money you want to put into it. But it's around 25% where you don't have to rebuild all your grids. Why do you want to do that? Distribution and transmission, and try and find all these problems with storage. Install more natural gas. That would mean the French have done it. It was called the Mesmer Plan. It was finished in the 1980s. Macron was bragging the other day, oh yeah, we can do AI. They produced 379, I think it was, terawatt hours of, we can't call it green, but it was carbon-free electricity, right? And he said, yeah, we exported 90 terawatt hours last year. We could keep that and have data centers. Now, of course, the Germans are all nervous about this, right? But it works. And once it's amortized, those old plants would, once they're amortized, maybe it takes 20 years if you're building them like an army, like they did, right? 57 plants in well, it's 15 years, but it's really 26 years because of planning. And they stopped because they were overgoing, right? If you amortize it in 20 years, those old plants, generation 2, last 60 years maybe, okay? Maybe 80. So 40, 60 years, it's paid for. The first order, when you do, accountants or whatever, do calculations comparing plants, it's the cost of natural gas for one plant. The upfront capital isn't much, but it's the cost of natural gas. The coal plant is the cost of the coal. The first order, when they're doing calculations for nuclear, they put in 0 for the fuel. And the plant's paid for, right? So the new plants, the generation 3 plus, the big ones, they're designed to last 80 to 100 years, right? So to me, this is rational. The French, in fact, show they have been able to run some of their plants as, do I have it there? As base load, clearly, but also they do load following and they do some peaking. So they are flexible to back up renewables, but if you keep it to a reasonable level or other of this nature. And I've been taken to calling it renewable fundamentalism. You have to get over this and have a pragmatic mix, in my opinion. And, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for a very interesting presentation. Now I'd like to